The night was beautiful and full of excitement. The city's grand concert hall glowed under golden lights, and people in elegant clothes walked through the red carpet with laughter and joy. Waiters moved around with trays of sparkling drinks, and photographers clicked pictures of famous faces. Everyone had come to watch the famous pianist Victor Lang perform. He was known for his incredible talent, but also for his proud attitude. He loved being the center of attention, loved when people whispered his name with admiration. Among the shining gowns and tuxedos sat a quiet woman named Eleanor. She looked simple in her modest blue dress, sitting near the corner of the hall where no one really noticed her. She wasn't rich or famous like the others. Her eyes carried a gentle sadness, the kind that only comes from old memories. She had come with her friend Clara, who worked backstage at the event and had given her a spare ticket. Eleanor didn't really plan to come, but Clara insisted, saying, "You need a night out, something to make you smile again." And Eleanor had agreed, even though her heart wasn't in it. As the lights dimmed, the audience fell silent, and Victor Lang appeared on stage, tall, confident, and dressed in a shining black suit. He smiled as the crowd cheered, bowed deeply, and took his seat at the grand piano. The first few notes filled the air like magic. The hall came alive with sound always smooth. Rich and full of life, people were mesmerized. His fingers moved across the keys like they were born there. He made it look so easy, so effortless. And when he ended his first piece, the crowd exploded in applause. Victor stood and smiled proudly. "Thank you, my wonderful audience," he said, his voice full of charm. "It's always a pleasure to play for people who appreciate true art." The audience laughed politely, and he continued with another piece, his fingers dancing faster, louder, stronger. He was showing off now, and people loved it. Eleanor watched quietly, a faint smile on her face. But something inside her felt heavy. She could see his skill, but she could also sense his arrogance. Music to her had always been about emotion, about heart, not showing off. As the performance went on, the hall sparkled with admiration. People clapped, laughed, and enjoyed every piece. Victor played with confidence, but there was something missing. Something deeper. Something real. Eleanor leaned back, lost in her thoughts, remembering the time when she used to play. Her fingers tingled slightly, as if they remembered the feeling of the piano keys beneath them. The memories hurt, but they also felt alive. Clara, sitting beside her, whispered, "He's good, isn't he?" Eleanor nodded. "Yes, he is, technically perfect." Clara looked at her curiously. "Technically?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "Music is more than just technique," and her eyes drifted toward the shining piano on the stage. When Victor finished his next performance, he stood again, soaking in the applause. He loved moments like this. He bowed, adjusted his cuffs, and then decided to entertain the crowd with something new. "You know," he said into the microphone, "people often ask me if anyone can just sit down and play like this." A few people chuckled, and he smiled playfully. "Maybe we should test that tonight." The audience began to laugh, curious about what he was planning. Victor looked around the hall, pretending to search for someone. His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Eleanor. Sitting quietly in her corner, he tilted his head and smirked. Perhaps that lady there would like to try. For a moment, Eleanor thought she had misheard. She looked around, but everyone was now turning to look at her. A few people giggled softly. She could feel her cheeks growing warm. Clara whispered quickly, "He's just joking." "Don't worry." But Victor wasn't done. "Come now," he said with a grin. "Let's see if anyone can challenge the great Victor Lang tonight." The crowd laughed and clapped, some out of amusement, others just to play along. Eleanor froze in her seat, her heart pounding. She didn't like attention, not anymore. She wanted to disappear, but the spotlight moved toward her, bright and blinding. She forced a small smile and shook her head. "No, thank you," she said softly. But Victor pushed again. "Don't be shy. I promise I won't bite." People around her started clapping louder, cheering for her to go up. It was all in fun for them. But for Eleanor, it was something else. She hadn't touched a piano in years. And now, in front of hundreds of strangers, being called out like this felt like a cruel trick. Clara whispered, "You can say no." But something inside Eleanor stirred, a mix of fear, pride and curiosity, maybe, just maybe. This was fate giving her a strange second chance. She stood slowly, the crowd clapping louder now. Victor smiled like a man certain of victory, as if he was sure she would fumble and make him look even better by comparison. Eleanor walked toward the stage, her steps soft and unsure, her hands trembling slightly. The light grew brighter as she climbed the stairs, and for a brief second, Her eyes met Victor's. He smiled mockingly. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "It's just for fun." Eleanor nodded. Her face calm, but inside her heart was racing. As she reached the piano, she looked at it like an old friend she hadn't seen in years. So many memories flooded back. Laughter, love, pain, loss, all hidden behind her quiet eyes. The crowd waited, whispering, smiling, expecting a joke. No one knew what was about to happen. No one imagined that this shy woman, invited as a joke, was about to play something that would change the night, and everyone in the room, forever. Victor stood beside the piano with a proud smile, the spotlight shining perfectly on him. He loved the feeling of power that came with being on stage. Every movement, every word he spoke made people watch him, laugh with him, and admire him. He had always been that way, confident and charming, but also a little too proud. He liked to test people, to see how far he could go with his jokes. Tonight was no different. He wanted to add a bit of humor to his performance, something to make people laugh, something that made him feel even more in control. He turned toward the audience and said, "Music should be fun, don't you think? Maybe someone here wants to give it a try?" His voice was playful, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the hall for a reaction. People began to laugh softly, thinking he was joking. But then his gaze stopped again on Eleanor, the quiet woman sitting near the back. Her simple blue dress and calm posture made her stand out in the crowd of shiny sequins and jewelry. To Victor, she looked like an easy target for a harmless prank. He pointed toward her with a mischievous grin. "You, madam, how about you? Would you like to try?" The audience turned to look at her again, and laughter filled the air. Eleanor froze in her seat. She could feel dozens of eyes on her. Her heart began to beat faster. She tried to smile politely and shake her head, but Victor didn't stop. He stepped away from the piano and said loudly, "Come on, everyone. Let's give her a little encouragement." The hall echoed with clapping and cheering, some people shouting, "Go on, try it," others just laughing for fun. Eleanor wanted to sink into her chair and disappear. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. She whispered to her friend Clara, "Why is he doing this?" Clara frowned. "He's just showing off. You don't have to do anything." But Victor was determined to keep the crowd entertained. He leaned against the piano and said into the microphone, "I promise it's easy, just a few notes. I'll even guide you." His tone was teasing, and the audience loved it. They laughed again. Completely unaware of how uncomfortable Eleanor felt, she had come here just to enjoy the music quietly, not to be part of the show. But now she was the center of everyone's attention. Eleanor looked up at Victor, her eyes calm but uncertain. "I really can't," she said softly. But her voice was lost in the noise of laughter and applause. Victor smiled wider. "Oh, don't be modest. You might surprise us all." The way he said it made the crowd cheer even louder. Some people took out their phones, expecting a funny moment, a woman trying to play and failing. Inside, Eleanor's mind was spinning. She didn't like attention. She didn't like being pushed. But something about the way he was smirking, the way people were laughing, stirred something deep inside her. It wasn't anger exactly, but a kind of quiet strength that had been asleep for years. She thought about all the times she used to play, about how the piano had once been her whole world, before life broke her heart and took that world away. Clara squeezed her hand and whispered, "You can say no, Eleanor." But Eleanor took a slow breath, her chest rising with quiet courage. "Maybe it's time," she said softly, though Clara didn't understand what she meant. The applause around her was growing. Victor clapped too, waving for her to come forward. Still smiling as if this was all a friendly joke, Eleanor stood slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. The sound made the audience cheer louder. They thought she had agreed to play along with the prank. She gave a small, nervous smile and started walking toward the stage, her steps slow, her heart pounding in her ears. Clara whispered, "Be careful." But Eleanor didn't stop. She moved through the rows of people, feeling their eyes follow her, some curious, some amused. Victor extended a hand to help her onto the stage. "That's the spirit," he said warmly, though a small glint of arrogance still flashed in his eyes. He loved that everyone was watching, loved that he had created this moment. To him it was harmless fun, but to Eleanor it was something deeper, something that would soon turn the night upside down. As she reached the piano, the lights seemed brighter, almost too bright. She could barely see past the crowd. She stood there for a moment, looking at the instrument that had once been her closest friend. She hadn't touched a piano in years. Not since her life had fallen apart, memories rushed back of concerts. Laughter of a home filled with music and then of silence after everything she loved was gone. She took another breath, her hands trembling slightly. Victor, seeing her hesitation, leaned close and whispered, "Just press a few keys, nothing serious." "No pressure." His tone was still teasing. But Eleanor didn't answer. She simply nodded and sat down on the piano bench. The room quieted slightly. People were still smiling, waiting for something funny to happen. A few whispered jokes ran through the crowd. Victor stood to the side, arms crossed. "Pretending to be patient? Whenever you're ready," he said. Half joking, half challenging, Eleanor looked down at the piano, her reflection faintly visible on the glossy black surface. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She could feel the weight of the moment, the mix of laughter and doubt filling the air around her. But in that silence between breaths, something inside her shifted. Her heart slowed, her mind grew still, and for the first time in years, she felt connected to something real. The crowd didn't know it, but this wasn't just a game to her. This was her life, her story, her truth waiting to be heard. She glanced once at Victor, who was still smiling confidently, and then looked back at the piano. The audience waited, some still laughing quietly, others curious. The joke had gone on longer than expected, but before anyone could say another word, Eleanor placed her hands on the keys, her fingers settling naturally, almost gracefully. Victor noticed the way she held her hands. The posture wasn't that of a beginner. His smile faded just a little. Something about her calmness made him pause. The laughter in the room began to fade. The energy shifted without anyone realizing it. Eleanor closed her eyes, took one more deep breath, and pressed the first note. It rang out softly through the hall, clear and pure, and in that single sound, something beautiful began to awaken. The joke was about to end, and the real music was about to begin. Eleanor sat at the piano, her hands trembling slightly. She could feel hundreds of eyes staring at her. The bright light from the stage made her vision blur a little, and the soft murmurs of the audience filled her ears. People were whispering, some laughing, some curious. They didn't expect anything serious from her. They thought it was just a joke, something funny to lighten the mood. Even Victor stood beside her with a confident grin, his arms crossed, waiting for her to hit a few random notes so everyone could laugh and move on. Eleanor tried to steady her breathing. Her heart was racing, her palms were sweaty. She hadn't touched a piano in years. Her fingers hovered above the keys, unsure where to begin. For a moment she thought about standing up and walking away. She could just laugh, say, "I can't," and leave. That would be the easy thing to do. But something inside her wouldn't let her. Something deep and quiet whispered. Just one note. She took a small breath and pressed a single key. The soft sound of the piano filled the hall for just a moment. Light and uncertain. But even that one note made her heart jump. It was like a spark. A tiny reminder of who she used to be. The laughter in the hall continued. Someone shouted playfully, "Go on, don't be shy." And Victor smirked, Yes, take your time." "The stage is yours," his tone was half mocking, half charming. He didn't mean harm, but he also didn't think she would actually play. Eleanor looked up briefly and saw his expression. Confident, teasing, proud, and that somehow gave her strength. She looked back at the piano, the polished black surface reflecting the lights above her. She closed her eyes for a second and remembered how it used to feel. The rhythm, the emotion, the freedom. Her late husband used to tell her, "When you play, Ellie, the world stops for a moment." She swallowed hard at the memory, her throat tight. Clara, watching from her seat in the audience, held her breath. She knew Eleanor had played once, but she didn't know the whole story. She didn't know how much pain music carried for her friend. She just sat there hoping Eleanor wouldn't be embarrassed, hoping it would all end quickly. But when she saw the look in Eleanor's eyes, that small flicker of focus, she felt something change. Eleanor moved her fingers gently across the keys, playing another note, then another. At first the sound was uneven, like a beginner testing the instrument, but slowly, the rhythm began to form. Something small, something fragile, yet full of feeling. The laughter started to fade. People began to notice the melody was soft, almost like a whisper, but it carried emotion, a kind of sadness that made people stop talking. Victor's smile began to fade slightly. He tilted his head, curious now. His confident posture straightened as he watched her. This wasn't what he expected. Her hands moved with grace, hesitant but trained, like someone who had once played beautifully but hadn't in a long time. The sound filled the hall, clear and trembling at first, but slowly gaining warmth. The audience grew quieter. A few phones that had been raised to record the funny moment slowly lowered. People started looking at one another, unsure if they should still be laughing. Eleanor didn't notice any of it. She was lost in the sound. Each key she touched felt like breathing again. She wasn't performing for them. She wasn't proving anything. She was just letting her heart speak through the piano, something she hadn't done in so long. A small child sitting near the front whispered to her mother. "She's really good." The mother nodded slowly, her smile fading into awe. The melody grew stronger, smoother. As Eleanor found her rhythm, her shoulders relaxed, and her fingers began to move with natural grace. Even the air in the hall seemed to change, lighter, calmer, full of something no one could explain. Victor took a step closer, trying to see her hands, the way she pressed the keys, the slight tremor in her movements. There was pain in her music, and it showed. He had never heard a sound quite like that before. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't practiced, but it was real. Every note carried emotion, sorrow, hope, and love all at once. Clara felt tears in her eyes as she watched. She remembered how Eleanor had stopped playing after the accident, how she never spoke about her past as a pianist. And now here she was, sitting on a stage, playing as if her heart had been waiting for this very moment. Eleanor's music grew more confident, the notes stronger, clearer, as if she was remembering something lost long ago. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. Her world had shrunk to just the piano and her memories. She could feel her late husband's presence in every chord, could almost hear his voice. "You were born to play, Ellie." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't stop. The crowd was now completely silent, no laughter, no whispers. Just the sound of her music echoing through the grand hall. The chandeliers above seemed to shimmer softer, like the light itself had slowed to listen. Victor stood still, all traces of his earlier arrogance gone. His lips parted slightly, his pride forgotten. He wasn't the center of the room anymore. Yes, she was. When the melody reached its softest point, Eleanor paused, her hands hovering over the keys. The sound hung in the air like a delicate breath. She opened her eyes slowly, realizing that the whole room had gone completely still. She looked around and saw faces, surprised, emotional, stunned. Even Victor's eyes had softened. He looked at her differently now, no longer amused but deeply moved. Eleanor lowered her hands, her chest rising and falling with each breath. She whispered to herself, "I still remember," and for a long moment no one said a word. It was as if everyone was afraid to break the silence her music had created. Then somewhere in the back someone began to clap softly. The sound spread one by one until the entire room was filled with applause. But this wasn't the laughter or mockery she had expected. It was respect, admiration, and awe. She stood slowly and gave a small bow, her eyes filled with quiet emotion. Victor stepped forward, his earlier pride replaced by something like humility. He whispered softly, "That was no joke." Eleanor smiled gently and walked off the stage, the sound of the piano still echoing in her mind, her heart lighter than it had been in years. What started as a moment of embarrassment had turned into something unforgettable, and for the first time in a long while she felt alive again. Eleanor sat at the piano, her back straight, her hands resting gently on the keys. The room was quiet now. The laughter and whispers from before had faded into a heavy silence. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what she would do. Victor stood beside her with a playful smile still on his face, though a tiny part of him was beginning to wonder who this woman really was. He had wanted a joke, something light and funny, but the atmosphere in the room had changed. There was a strange feeling in the air, something deeper, something no one could name. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm her racing heart. She could still hear the faint echo of laughter in her memory, but she pushed it away. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She wasn't there to prove anything. She was there because fate had somehow led her back to this piano, back to the one thing she thought she had lost forever. The lights felt warm on her face. Her breathing slowed, and she whispered softly under her breath, "All right, let's remember." Her fingers touched the first key. The sound was soft, gentle, like the first drop of rain on a quiet night. It was a small sound, yet it filled the hall in a way no one expected. People leaned forward without realizing it, curious, surprised by how that one note felt alive. She pressed another, then another, and soon a delicate melody began to form. It was slow, careful, as if she was trying to wake something sleeping inside her. Victor folded his arms, smiling slightly. He still thought it was harmless fun. Maybe she had taken a few piano lessons years ago. Maybe she'd play something simple and cute. But as he listened, his smile began to fade. Her touch on the keys wasn't random or clumsy. It was graceful. It had rhythm, emotion, and control. Each note connected to the next like a thread of silk. Eleanor didn't notice him or the audience anymore. In her mind, she was somewhere else. She remembered the small music school where she used to teach, the smell of old wood and sheet music, the laughter of her students, and the sound of her husband's voice when he would call from the doorway. You could play forever and I'd never get tired of it. Tears filled her eyes. But she kept playing. The melody grew stronger. Her hands moving faster, smoother, the music rising like a wave, and the entire hall felt it. Something in her music spoke to them in a way words couldn't. It wasn't just sound, it was emotion, it was pain and love and loss. It was everything she had kept locked inside for years. The crowd, which had come expecting entertainment and laughter, now sat completely still. Even the waiters had stopped moving, holding their trays mid-air, afraid to make a sound. The chandeliers above glittered softly, the light reflecting in the tears beginning to form in some people's eyes. The music carried a kind of truth. It was fragile but powerful, the kind that reached straight into the heart. Victor stared, his arrogance melting away. He took a step closer, his eyebrows drawn together. He had played piano for decades, traveled the world, performed in front of kings and presidents, but this was different. This wasn't about perfect technique or fame. It was about soul, the kind of music that made people feel something real. And he suddenly realized he had never played like that. Eleanor's fingers moved like they remembered every note, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. She wasn't thinking, she was feeling, and the piano responded to her like it was alive too. It was no longer the grand shining instrument on stage. It had become part of her. Together they were telling a story, one that everyone in that room understood even if they didn't know why. Her melody shifted from sorrow to beauty, from silence to hope. It was like she was guiding everyone through her memories, through her pain, and slowly, through her healing. A man in the front row lowered his head. Wiping a tear, a young woman held her breath. Even Victor couldn't look away, his usual confidence gone, his heart pounding for reasons he couldn't explain. The hall, once filled with laughter and chatter, now felt sacred, like a place where something divine was happening. Each note she played seemed to float in the air long after it was gone. Lingering like the scent of a dream, Eleanor didn't look up. She didn't need applause or attention. She was simply speaking through music, saying all the things she had never said out loud. She remembered the night of the accident, the rain, the flashing lights, the silence that followed. She remembered how she stopped playing after that, how she couldn't bear to touch the piano again, because every note reminded her of what she lost. But now here she was, playing again, and for the first time it didn't hurt the same way. It felt like letting go, like forgiving herself. Victor took another small step forward, his eyes fixed on her hands. He could see the way her fingers curved perfectly, the way she controlled the sound with grace that only true masters had. He whispered under his breath, "Who is she?" But no one answered. Everyone was too mesmerized to speak. As the final notes began to fade, Eleanor slowed her hands, letting the melody drift softly into silence. The last chord hung in the air, trembling and beautiful, and then it was gone. The hall was completely still. No one dared move or even breathe. The sound of that final note lingered in their minds like the echo of something eternal. Eleanor lifted her hands from the keys and let them rest in her lap. Her eyes still closed. For a long moment she sat there, the quiet wrapping around her like a warm blanket. Then she opened her eyes slowly, her face calm, peaceful. She looked out into the crowd, and for the first time, she saw not judgment or laughter, but awe. Pure, silent awe. Victor couldn't find his words, his mouth slightly open, his pride gone completely. He had wanted to make people laugh, but instead he had been silenced, not by force, but by beauty. Eleanor stood slowly, her body trembling slightly from the emotion she had poured into the music. She gave a small bow, and in that quiet moment before the applause, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Then somewhere in the audience, someone clapped, softly, then another and another, until the room erupted with applause. People stood cheering and crying. The hall was alive with emotion, but through it all, Eleanor just smiled faintly. She didn't play to impress anyone. She played to heal herself, and in doing so, she healed everyone who heard her. It was a night no one in that hall would ever forget, not even Victor, who would never again take music or humility onto for granted. The hall was silent, not a single whisper, not a single sound. Only the soft hum of the piano filled the air. Eleanor's fingers moved across the keys like they were dancing. Graceful and gentle, each note that came out felt alive, full of emotion. It was not just music anymore. It was a story. Her story. The audience had stopped breathing. Even Victor, the proud pianist, stood frozen beside her, watching in disbelief, his usual smile gone, his eyes wide as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. The melody began softly, almost like a whisper, the kind of tune that sneaks into your heart without warning. It was sad but beautiful. It spoke of loss and love, of hope and heartbreak, and though no words were spoken, everyone could feel what she was trying to say. It was like her soul was speaking through the piano. The sound filled every corner of the room, wrapping around everyone, touching them deeply. Eleanor's hands moved faster, smoother, as if they had been waiting for this moment. For years she had hidden her pain, locked it away, and now it was all flowing out in music. Each note was like a tear, every melody a memory. She remembered the nights she used to play with her husband standing behind her, smiling proudly. She remembered their small home, filled with laughter and piano sounds. She remembered the accident, the sirens, the darkness that followed, the silence that swallowed her life after that day. But now here she was, letting it all go, one note at a time. Victor stood still, his eyes fixed on her hands. He was known for being the best, for being confident, but at that moment he felt small. He had played all his life for fame, for applause, for money, but this woman was playing for something else. She was playing from her heart, and that was something he had never done. He realized that she didn't need a stage or a spotlight or an audience. She just needed the piano and the courage to feel. The melody changed. It grew stronger, deeper, more powerful. It filled the hall like a wave, washing over everyone. People who had been smiling now sat with tears in their eyes. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hands. Afraid to make a sound, an old man near the back closed his eyes. Remembering his own lost love, even the waiters stood frozen, their trays shaking in their hands. The music felt endless, timeless, every second more beautiful than the last. Eleanor wasn't just playing. She was reliving, healing, transforming. Her shoulders moved softly with the rhythm. Her head tilted slightly as if she was listening to something only she could hear, and the audience followed her every motion, completely lost in the moment. Victor felt something strange inside him, a tightness in his chest, a feeling he couldn't explain. He had never been moved by another musician before. He had always believed no one could match him. But now, he knew he was witnessing something far greater than skill. It was truth, raw and honest, and it shook him. Eleanor's fingers slowed for a moment. The music softened like a sigh, a breath after crying, and then without warning it grew again, faster, louder, full of life. Her hands blurred as they moved across the piano, but every note was clear, perfect, full of meaning. It was as if she had found the strength to live again. Her pain was turning into beauty right in front of everyone. The crowd sat motionless, no one dared move, afraid to break the magic. It didn't feel like a performance anymore. It felt like a confession, something private and sacred, and everyone there knew they were witnessing something they might never see again. The lights above reflected off the piano, and for a moment it looked like Eleanor was glowing. Her face peaceful, her eyes closed, her heart open. Victor slowly stepped back, almost as if he didn't belong on that stage anymore. He lowered his head, ashamed of how he had treated her. His earlier arrogance now felt ridiculous. He realized that he had brought her here as a joke, but she had brought something real, something pure. When Eleanor reached the final part of her song, the notes became softer again, like the end of a dream. The melody carried a feeling of forgiveness, of peace, of finally letting go. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed the last few keys, each one hanging in the air longer than the last, echoing through the room like a heartbeat. Then she stopped. For a few seconds, there was nothing, no sound, no applause, just silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, sacred. Everyone was too stunned to move. They just stared at her, their eyes shining, their hearts full. It was as if time itself had stopped. Victor looked around at the audience, at the faces filled with emotion, and then back at Eleanor, sitting quietly with her hands resting on her lap. The silence stretched on. No one dared to break it. Even Eleanor kept her eyes closed, breathing slowly, her face calm. She didn't need the applause. She didn't care for the reaction. She had played what she needed to play. She had said everything she couldn't put into words, and now she was at peace. Victor swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to say something, anything, but no words came. All he could do was stare at her in awe. He had thought he was teaching her a lesson, but it turned out she had taught him one. That music wasn't about showing off. It was about feeling, about truth, about being human. Finally, someone clapped, one single sound in the quiet hall, then another and another, and within seconds the entire audience was on their feet. The hall exploded with applause, loud and thunderous. People were crying, cheering, shouting her name, some even holding their hearts as if trying to keep them from breaking. Eleanor stood slowly, her eyes still glistening, and gave a small bow, her smile gentle, humble. She didn't say a word, she didn't need to. The music had already said everything. Victor stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. That was extraordinary. Eleanor turned to him, her voice calm and kind. It wasn't me, it was the music. Victor nodded, his eyes full of emotion, and for the first time in years, he felt truly silent, truly humbled. As Eleanor walked off the stage, the audience continued to cheer, but all she heard was the echo of her music inside her heart, the sound that had healed her and reminded her who she really was that night. Her performance didn't just silence the room, it awakened every soul in it. The sound of applause filled the entire hall. People were on their feet clapping, cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes, but in the middle of that noise, Eleanor stood still beside the piano, breathing softly. She wasn't thinking about fame or victory. She wasn't thinking about the crowd. She was just feeling a quiet peace inside her heart, something she hadn't felt in years. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, from relief. She had finally let her heart speak again, and the world had listened. Victor Lang, the famous pianist, stood a few steps away, completely speechless. His usual confident smile was gone. His eyes were wide, and his chest rose and fell quickly. He had performed in front of thousands of people all over the world, but never, and not once, had he seen something like this. The way the audience reacted, the way the air itself felt heavy with emotion. It wasn't just talent. It was something bigger, something spiritual. He took a small step toward Eleanor and whispered, "Who are you?" Eleanor turned her head slightly, her calm eyes meeting his. "Just someone who used to play," she said softly, her voice carrying both sadness and grace. But Victor wasn't satisfied with that answer. He needed to know more. He looked at her hands, her posture, the way she had controlled the music. Everything about her spoke of experience, of mastery. This wasn't an ordinary woman. She wasn't just someone who used to play. She was someone who had lived music, who had breathed it. The audience slowly quieted down, but their eyes never left the stage. People wanted to know who she was too. Whispers spread through the crowd like wind. "She was amazing," someone said. "Who is she?" Another asked, and then one man near the front gasped softly, recognizing her face. "Wait, isn't that Eleanor Hayes?" he said aloud, heads turned. The name rippled through the room like a secret being shared. Eleanor Hayes, yes, that was her name. A name that once meant something in the world of classical music. Years ago, she had been a rising star, a pianist known for her deep emotional style. She had performed in small halls and schools, inspiring young musicians everywhere. People loved her for her kindness, her humility, and her music that touched hearts, but one day, she had disappeared without a word. No more concerts, no interviews, no trace, just silence. Victor's eyes widened. "Eleanor Hayes?" he whispered, as if testing the sound of it. He remembered the name from his early years, back when he was still learning. She had been one of those rare musicians everyone respected, not for fame, but for soul. He had even watched one of her old performances online once, but she had vanished before he ever met her. "You're her," he said quietly, his voice full of awe. Eleanor smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both warmth and pain. "I used to be," she said simply. Victor wanted to ask why she had stopped, what had happened to her, but before he could, someone in the crowd spoke. "My father told me about her. She lost her family in an accident years ago." The words hung in the air, heavy and heartbreaking. The audience fell silent again. Eleanor's eyes softened. She didn't flinch at the mention. She had lived with that pain for so long that it no longer scared her. "Yes," she said quietly, her voice steady. "I lost them. And after that I couldn't play anymore." She looked down at the piano, her reflection faintly shining in its polished surface. "Every note reminded me of them. Every sound brought back memories I couldn't bear." Her eyes glistened. But she didn't cry. Her strength came from somewhere deeper now. Victor lowered his gaze, feeling a deep ache in his chest. He realized that the woman he had teased, the woman he had invited to play as a joke, had lived through something far more painful than he could ever imagine. And yet she had come here, faced a crowd, and played with more emotion than he ever could. He felt ashamed. truly ashamed. His arrogance felt small and childish in front of her quiet courage. The audience was silent, many of them holding back tears. They hadn't just watched a performance. They had witnessed a story of pain and healing unfold in front of their eyes. The air in the hall felt heavy with respect. No one laughed. No one whispered anymore. They all just watched her with admiration. Eleanor placed her hand gently on the piano again, tracing its smooth surface. "This used to be my voice," she said softly. "But after I lost them, I forgot how to speak." She looked at Victor and smiled gently. Until tonight, Victor's throat tightened. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that could express what he felt. But all that came out was, "I'm sorry." She looked at him kindly. "Don't be," she said. "You didn't know." And for a moment, they stood there, the proud pianist and the quiet woman, two artists connected by something only music could explain. From the back of the hall, a slow clap began again, but this time it wasn't wild or loud. It was gentle, respectful, filled with emotion. Soon others joined in, and the applause grew, not in volume but in sincerity. People weren't cheering for entertainment now. They were honoring her story, her strength, her heart. Victor stepped back and motioned toward her. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly, "tonight, we were not entertained. We were moved." He looked at Eleanor. "By a woman who reminded us what music truly means." The audience cheered again, but this time the sound felt different. Warmer, filled with gratitude. Eleanor bowed her head slightly, her eyes shining under the lights, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel broken. She felt seen. She felt alive. The piano beside her was no longer a reminder of pain. It was a bridge, connecting her to the world again. As she walked off the stage slowly, people stood, clapping until their hands ached. Victor followed her with his eyes, still stunned, still humbled. He knew he would never forget this night, the night a woman he had mocked had taught him what real art was. Not perfection, not pride, but truth. Behind the curtain, Eleanor paused. She looked back at the piano one last time and whispered, "Thank you." The applause still echoing through the hall, tears finally rolled down her cheeks. Not from sadness, but from peace. She had played again. She had remembered who she was, and in doing so, she had silenced the world, and not with power, but with beauty, with honesty, with love. The silence in the grand hall lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like forever. Then, slowly, the sound of applause began again, soft at first, then louder, until the entire room erupted in thunderous clapping. People stood from their seats, tears still in their eyes, cheering for the woman who had just touched their hearts in a way they had never experienced before. It wasn't the usual polite applause that follows a performance. It was pure emotion, gratitude, and respect. Eleanor stood still, her hands folded in front of her, her eyes glistening under the warm lights. She couldn't believe what was happening. She had walked on that stage expecting laughter, maybe a few cruel jokes. But now the same people who had laughed at her were standing, cheering, some shouting her name. "Bravo, bravo!" The sound filled the hall like a wave of love and admiration. Clara, sitting in the audience, clapped harder than anyone, tears streaming down her face. She shouted, "That's my friend!" And everyone around her smiled, their own hearts full. Victor Lang stood frozen beside the piano, his head slightly bowed, his proud smile replaced by something new: humility. He looked at Eleanor with wide eyes, and in that moment, he wasn't the star anymore. He wasn't the center of the stage. She was. He took a slow breath and stepped toward her, his voice soft but full of emotion. You've reminded me what real music sounds like," he said, his words trembling. "I thought I knew it all, but tonight I learned something I'll never forget." Eleanor turned toward him, her face calm and kind. She gave a small smile. "Music isn't about knowing," she said gently. "It's about feeling." Victor nodded slowly, his throat tight. He wanted to say more, but he couldn't find the words. She had said it perfectly, simple and true. The applause went on and on. People were crying, hugging each other, some even whispering prayers of thanks for witnessing such beauty. The hall that had once been filled with laughter now felt like a holy place, as if everyone there had shared a sacred experience. Victor raised his hand to quiet the crowd a little, his voice shaking slightly as he spoke into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone respectful and humble, "tonight, you have all witnessed something rare, something that doesn't happen often. Pure, honest music. He turned to Eleanor, his voice softer now. This woman was a stranger to us an hour ago, but now she has reminded us all what art really means. The audience clapped again, louder than before, some shouting her name. Eleanor! Eleanor! The sound filled the hall like thunder. Victor stepped closer, looked into her eyes, and said quietly, so only she could hear, "I should be learning from you." Eleanor's eyes softened and she shook her head slowly. "No," she said kindly. "We all learn from life, and tonight, it was just my turn to speak." Her words were gentle, but they carried the weight of wisdom. Victor looked down. Ashamed of how he had treated her before, he remembered how he had pointed at her, teased her in front of everyone, and now he wished he could take it all back. He felt small, but also grateful. She had not only forgiven him, she had changed him. He took a deep breath, turned to the crowd, and said, "I think this night belongs to her." Then he stepped back and clapped his hands high above his head, encouraging the audience to do the same. The cheers grew louder, the sound echoing off the marble walls. The chandeliers above shimmered with light, and for a moment the entire hall seemed alive. Eleanor looked out at the people cheering for her, and she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Joy, not the kind that comes from success or applause, but the kind that comes from peace. She had faced her fears, faced her pain, and shared her heart with the world again. She had given them music, but in return, they had given her something even greater. Acceptance. As she stood there, Victor slowly approached her again. He offered his hand, his expression sincere. "Will you honor us with one more piece?" he asked softly. The crowd immediately cheered in agreement, shouting for more, but Eleanor smiled gently and shook her head. "No," she said softly. Tonight was enough. Her tone was peaceful, like someone who had finally found what she was searching for. Victor nodded with understanding. He didn't push her. Instead, he bowed his head to her, something he had never done to anyone before. The audience gasped softly, surprised by the humility of the great Victor Lang. Eleanor smiled and placed her hand lightly over her heart. "Thank you," she said to him and to the crowd. The applause continued for a long time, even after she started walking off the stage. People reached out their hands to her as she passed, wanting to touch her, to thank her. Victor watched her go, his eyes filled with admiration. "She silenced the room," he whispered to himself, "and changed it forever." Backstage, Clara ran to Eleanor and hugged her tightly. "You were incredible," she cried. "Do you know what you just did out there? You made everyone cry." Eleanor laughed softly, wiping her own tears. "I didn't mean to," she said. "I just played what I felt." Clara shook her head, smiling. "That's why it was perfect." Meanwhile, out in the hall, people were still talking. Some couldn't stop crying. Others were calling their friends, saying, "You won't believe what happened tonight." And even the staff members stood in silence, still amazed it wasn't just a concert anymore. It had become a memory, something that would live in every person's heart who was there that night. Victor lingered on the stage for a while, staring at the piano. The same piano he had always seen as a tool for performance. Now it looked different. It felt alive, sacred. He touched the keys softly and whispered, "Thank you," as if speaking to the music itself. He knew he would never play the same way again. He had seen what true music was, and it wasn't about fame, it was about truth. Eleanor and Clara stepped outside into the cool night air, the stars shining above them. Eleanor took a deep breath, the city lights glowing in her eyes. "I think I finally let them go," she said quietly. Clara smiled. "Your husband and child?" Eleanor nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "But they were with me tonight, every note I played." She smiled softly, tears falling down her cheeks, but this time, they were tears of peace. Somewhere behind them, the doors of the concert hall opened, and a soft wave of applause drifted out once more. Carried by the night breeze, Eleanor turned to look back one last time and smiled, the sound of the piano still echoing in her heart. That night, she hadn't just silenced the room. She had awakened something in every soul who heard her play, and in herself she had finally found the courage to live again. The next morning, the whole city seemed to be talking about what had happened at the grand gala. News reporters, journalists, and music lovers were all sharing one story. The wow story of a woman who had silenced a famous pianist and moved an entire hall to tears. The headlines appeared everywhere. Unknown woman brings audience to tears with heartfelt piano performance. Another one said, Eleanor Hayes, the pianist who disappeared and returned for one magical night. People couldn't stop reading, sharing, and wondering who she really was. Eleanor woke up early that morning, the sunlight spilling softly through her small apartment window. For the first time in many years, she felt rested. She sat up slowly and looked at her old piano in the corner of the room. It had been covered for so long, dust gathering over its surface, but last night had changed something inside her. She stood up, walked toward it, and gently lifted the cover. Her fingers brushed against the smooth keys, and a soft smile spread across her face. "Good morning, old friend," she whispered. Her phone buzzed on the table. Clara had been calling her since dawn. When Eleanor answered, her friend's excited voice came rushing through. "Eleanor, you're all over the news. Everyone's talking about you." Eleanor laughed softly. "Oh dear, I didn't mean to cause such a storm." Clara couldn't stop talking. "The videos of your performance are everywhere. Someone from the audience posted it online last night. It already has millions of views." Eleanor's eyes widened. She didn't even know someone had recorded her. "Millions?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Clara said. "And they're calling it, 'The Night Music Spoke.'" Eleanor didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to fame anymore. She hadn't even played for herself in years, and now the whole world was listening. She sat down on her sofa, thinking about what had happened. Every moment of that night felt like a dream. Victor's face, the audience's tears, the feeling of peace that filled her chest as she played. It was all still vivid in her mind. Meanwhile, Victor Lang was also awake. But his morning felt different. He sat at his grand piano in his large modern apartment, staring at the keys, his reflection staring back at him. He had been replaying Eleanor's performance in his head all night. He couldn't shake the sound of her music, the raw emotion, the truth in it. It made him question everything he thought he knew about art. He had always played for fame, for applause, for perfection, but now he understood something deeper. Music was not about pride, it was about heart. He opened his laptop and saw his inbox full of messages. News outlets wanted interviews, fans wanted his thoughts about the mysterious woman. But Victor didn't want attention. He wanted to find her, to thank her, to tell her how much she had changed him. He typed her name into the search bar, Eleanor Hayes, and was surprised by how many articles came up, old ones from years ago, stories about her rising career, her talent, her family tragedy, and her disappearance from music. His chest tightened as he read. He whispered to himself, all that pain, and still she played with such love. Back in Eleanor's apartment, she made herself a cup of tea and sat by the piano, her fingers lightly touching the keys. She didn't play yet. She just sat there, remembering. She had stayed away from music for so long because she thought it would hurt. But last night had shown her something. Music didn't cause her pain. It healed it, for the first time in years. She wanted to play again, not for anyone else, but for herself. She pressed the first note, soft and slow, then another and another. Soon a gentle tune filled her little apartment. Sunlight danced on the walls, and she smiled, tears falling down her cheeks. This wasn't a grand stage. There was no audience, no applause, but somehow it felt even more real, more honest. As she played, her phone rang again. It was Victor. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" she said softly. His voice came through, calm but full of emotion. "Eleanor, it's Victor Lang." She smiled faintly. "I thought you'd be too busy giving interviews." He chuckled lightly. "No interviews today, only gratitude." There was a pause. Then he said sincerely, "You changed me, Eleanor. You reminded me what music truly means, and I'll never forget that." She was silent for a moment, then said, "Music has a way of reminding us who we are." Victor took a deep breath. "Would you ever consider performing again?" he asked, his tone hopeful. "The world wants to hear you." Eleanor looked at her piano and smiled. "Maybe one day," she said softly, "but for now, I just want to play for the ones I love. And for myself." Victor didn't push her, he simply said, "Then play, Eleanor, and keep making the world quiet." After they hung up, Eleanor continued to play, her music soft and warm, like sunlight after a long storm outside. People in the city were still talking about her. Strangers who had never met her felt inspired. Musicians around the world were touched by her story. Her performance had become more than just a moment. It had become a message that true art comes from the heart, from truth, from love. That evening, she went for a walk near the park. The air was cool, and the sky was painted orange and pink by the setting sun. She saw a young boy sitting on a bench, playing a small keyboard with shy fingers. His mother stood nearby, smiling. But the boy looked nervous. Eleanor stopped and listened. Then she walked closer and said gently, "You play beautifully." The boy blushed. "I'm just learning," he said. Eleanor knelt beside him, her smile kind. "Never stop learning, but never forget to feel it." She placed a hand over his. "Music comes from here," she said, touching her heart. The boy nodded with wide eyes as she walked away. The boy began to play again, this time with more confidence, and Eleanor smiled to herself. She didn't need a stage anymore. She didn't need applause or fame. Her purpose was simple: to share music, to keep it alive, to pass it on. That night, as she sat by her piano again, she looked up at a photo of her husband and child on the wall. She whispered softly, "I hope you heard me." A tear rolled down her cheek. But this time it wasn't sadness, and it was peace. She began to play, and the notes floated through the open window into the quiet night. Somewhere in the city, people paused as if they could feel something gentle in the air. Her music had found its way back into the world, not through fame or fortune, but through heart, through healing, through truth. And though the grand hall was empty now, her melody still echoed in the hearts of those who had heard it. And in every note she played, there was a message: that beauty can rise from pain, that hope can live again, and that sometimes the quietest voices can touch the world the loudest.